Chapter 11. Learn to keep people dependent on you. To maintain your independence, you must always be needed and wanted. The more you are relied on, the more freedom you have. Make people dependent on you for their happiness and prosperity, and you have nothing to fear. Never teach them enough so that they can do without you. I wonder who wrote that. Sometime in the Middle Ages, a mercenary soldier whose name has not been recorded saved the town of Siena from a foreign aggressor. How could the good citizens of Siena reward him? No amount of money or honor could possibly compare in value to the preservation of a city's liberty. The citizens thought of making the mercenary the lord of the city, but even that they decided wasn't compence enough. At last, one of them stood before the assembly, called to debate this matter, and said, "Let us kill him and then worship him as a patron saint." And so they did. The Count of Carmagnola was one of the bravest and successful of the Condati. In 1442, late in his life, he was in the employ of the city of Venice, which was in the midst of a long war with Florence. The Count was suddenly recalled to Venice, a favorite of the people. He was received there with all kinds of honor and splendor. That evening, he was to dine with the Doge himself in the Doge's palace. On the day into the palace, however, he noticed that the guard was leading him in a different direction from usual, crossing the famous Bridge of Sighs. He suddenly realized where they were taking him, to the dungeon. He was convicted on a trumped-up charge, and the next day in the Piazza San Marco, before a horrified crowd who could not understand how his fate had changed so drastically, he was beheaded. Many of the great Condati of Renaissance Italy suffered the same fate as the patron saint of Siena and the Count Carmagnola. They won battle after battle for their employees, only to find themselves banished, imprisoned, and executed. The problem was not ingratitude. There was so many other cons as able to valiant as they were. They were replaceable. Nothing was lost by killing them. Meanwhile, the older among them had grown powerful themselves and wanted more and more money for their services. How much better then to do away with them and hire a younger, cheaper mercenary? That was the fate of Count Magnolia, who had started to act impudently and independently. He had taken his power for granted without making sure he was truly indispensable. Such is fate. To a less violent degree, one hopes, of those who do not make others dependent on them. Sooner or later, someone comes along who can do the job as well as they can. Someone younger, fresher, less compensated, less threatening. Be the only one who can do what you can do. Make the fate of those who hire you entwine with yours. They cannot possibly get rid of you. Otherwise, you will someday be forced to cross your own Bridge of Sighs. When Otto von Bismarck became a deputy in Prussian Parliament in 1847, he was 32 years old and without an ally or a friend. Looking around him, he decided that that the side of the ally himself was not the parliament's liberty or conservatives, not any particular minister, and certainly not the people. It was the king, Frederick William IV. This this was an odd choice to say the least. Frederick was at a low point of his power, a weak, indecisive man. He consistently gave in to the liberals in the parliaments. In fact, he was spineless and stood for much that Bismarck disliked personally and politically. Yet Bismarck courted Frederick night and day. When other deputies attacked the king for his many inept moves, only Bismarck stood by him. Finally, it all paid off. In 1851, Bismarck was made a minister in the king's cabinet. Now he went to work. Time and again he forced the king's hand, getting him to build up the military, to stand up to the liberals, to do exactly as Bismarck wished. He worked on Frederick's insecurities about his manliness, challenging him to be firm and to rule with pride. And he slowly restored the king's powers until the monarchy was once again the powerful force of Prussia. When Frederick died in 1861, his brother William assumed the throne. William disliked Bismarck intensely and had no intention of keeping him around. But he also inherited the same situation his brother had, enemies galore, who wanted to nibble his power away. He actually considered abdicating, feeling he lacked the strength to deal with this dangerous and precarious position. But Bismarck insinuated himself once again. He stood by the king, gave him strength, and urged him into firm, decisive action. The king grew dependent on Bismarck's strong arm tactic to keep his enemies at bay. And despite his apathy toward the man, he soon made him his prime minister. The two quarrels often over policy. Bismarck was much more conservative, but the king understood his own dependency. Whenever the prime minister threatened to resign, the king gave in to him, time after time. It was, in fact, Bismarck who set state policy. Years later, Bismarck's actions as Prussian prime minister led to various German states to be united into one country. Now Bismarck finagled the king into letting him be crowned emperor in Germany. Yet it was really Bismarck who had reached the heights of power. As right-hand man to the emperor, as the imperial chancellor and knighted prince, he pulled all levers. Most young and ambitious politicians looking out on the political landscape of 1840, Germany would have tried to build a power base among those with the most power. Bismarck saw different. Joining forces with the powerful can be foolish. They will swallow you up, just as Dodge of Venus swallowed up Count Magnolia. No one will come to depend on you if you think they are already strong. If you are ambitious, it is much wiser to seek out weaker rulers and masters with whom you can create a relationship of dependency. You become their strength, their intelligence, their spine. What power you hold, if they get rid of you, the whole indecisive would collapse. Necessity rules the world. People rarely act unless compelled to. If you create no need for yourself, then you will be done away with at first opportunity. If, on the other hand, you understand the laws of power and make others depend on you for their welfare if you can counteract their weakness with your own iron and blood. In Bismarck's phrase, then you will survive your masters as Bismarck did. You will have all the benefits of power without the throne that come from being a master. Thus, a wise prince will take of all to keep his citizens every sort under every circumstance, depending on the state and on him, and then they will always be trustworthy. Machiavelli. The ultimate power is the power to get people to do as you wish. When you can do this without having to force people or hurt them, when they willingly grant you what you desire, then your power is untouchable. The best way to achieve this position is to create a relationship of dependence. The master requires your service. He is weak or unable to function without you. He have enmeshed yourself in his work so deeply that doing away with you would bring him great difficulty, or at least would mean valuable time lost in training another to replace you. Once such relationship is established, you have the upper hand, the leverage to make the master do as you wish. It is the classic case of the man behind the throne, the servant of the king who actually controls the king. Bismarck did not have to bully either Frederick or William into doing his bidding. He simply made it clear that unless he got what he wanted, he would walk away, leaving the king to twist in the wind. Both kings soon danced in Bismarck's tune. Do not be one of the many who mistakenly believe that the ultimate form of power is independence. Power involves a relationship between people. You will always need others as allies, pawns, or even as weak matters who serve as your front. The completely independent man who lived in a cabin in the woods, he would have the freedom to come and go as he pleased, but he would have no power. The best you can hope for is that others will grow so dependent on you that you enjoy kind, reverse independence. Their need for you frees you. Louis XI, the great Spider King of France, had a weakness for astrology. He kept a court of astrologers who he admired until one day the man predicted that a lady of the court would die within 8 days. When the prophecy came true, Lady Louis was terrified, thinking that either the man had murdered the woman to prove his accuracy, or that he was versed in the science that his powers threatened Louis himself. In either case, he had to be killed. One evening, Louis summoned the astrologer to his room high in the castle. Before the man arrived, the king told his servants that when he gave the signal, they were to pick the astrologer up, carry him into the window, and hurl him into the ground, hundreds of feet below. The astrologer soon arrived. Before giving the signal, Louis decided to ask him one last question. You claim to understand astrology and to know the fate of others, so tell me what your fate will be and how long you have to live. I shall die just 3 days before your majesty. The astrologer replied, the king's signal was never given. The man's life was spared. The spider King not only protects his astrologer for okay, stop. The Spider King not only protected his astrologer for as long as he was alive, he lavished him with gifts and had him tendered by the finest court doctor. The astrologer survived Louis by several years, disproving his power of prophecy, but proving his mastery of power. This is the model. Make others dependent on you. To get rid of your spell, to get rid of you might spell disaster, even death. And your master dares not tempt fate by finding out. There are many ways to obtain such a position. Foremost among them is to possess a talent and creative skill that simply cannot be replaced. During the Renaissance, the major obstacle to a painter's success was finding the right patron. Michelangelo did this better than anyone else. His patron was John Pope Julius II. But he and the popes quarreled over the building of the Pope's marble tomb. Michelangelo left Rome in disgust. To the amazement of those in the Pope's circle, not only did the Pope not fire him, he sought him out and in his own haughty way begged the artist to stay. Michelangelo knew he could find another patron, but he could never find another Michelangelo. You do not have to have the talent of Michelangelo. You do not have to have a skill that sets you apart from the crowd. You should create a situation in which you can always latch on to another master or patron, but your master cannot easily find another servant with your particular talent. And if in reality you are not actually indispensable, you must find a way to make it look like you are. Having the appearance of specialized knowledge and skill gives you leeway in your ability to deceive those above you into thinking they cannot do without you. Real dependence on your master's part, however, leaves him more vulnerable to you than the faked variety. And it is always within your power to make your skill indispensable. This is what is meant by the entwining of fates, like creeping ivory. You have wrapped yourself around the source of power so that it would cause great trauma to cut you away. And you do not necessarily have to entwine yourself around the master. Another person will do, as long as he or she is indispensable in the chain. One day, Harry Kong, president of Columbia Pictures, was visited in his office by a gloomy group of his executives. It was 1951 when the witch hunt against communists in Hollywood, carried by the U.S. Congress Un-American Activities Committee, was at its height. The executives had bad news. One of their employees, songwriter John Howard Lawson, had been singled out as a communist. They had to get rid of him right away or suffer the wrath of the committee. Harry Kahn was no bleeding heart liberal. In fact, he had always been a die-hard Republican. His favorite politician was Benito Mussolini, whom he had once visited, and whose famed photo hung on his wall. If there was someone he hated, Cohen would call him a communist bastard. But to the executives' amusement, Cohen told them he would not fire Lawson. He did not keep the screenwriter on because he was a good writer. There were many good writers in Hollywood. He kept him because of a chain of dependence. Lawson was Humphrey Bogart's writer. Bogart was Columbia's star. If Cohen messed up with Lawson, he would ruin an immensely profitable relationship. This was worth more than terrible publicity brought to him by his defiance of the committee. Henry Kissinger managed to survive the many bloodletting that went on the Nixon White House, not because he was the best diplomat Nixon could find. There were other fine negotiators, and not because the two men got along so well. They did not, nor did they share their beliefs and politics. Kissinger survived because he entrenched himself in so many areas of the political structure that to do away with him would lead to areas of political structure to do away with him would lead to chaos. Michelangelo's power was intense, depending on one skill, his ability as an artist. Kissinger's was intense. He got himself involved in so many aspects and departments of the administration that his involvement became a card in his hand. It has also made him many allies. If you can arrange such a position for yourself, getting rid of you becomes dangerous. All sorts of independencies will unravel. Still, the intense form of power provides more freedom than the extensive, because those who have it depends on no particular master or particular position of power for their security. To make others dependent on you, one route to take is the secret intelligence tactic. By knowing other people's secrets, by holding information that they wouldn't want broadcast. You seal your fate with others. You are untouchable. Ministries of secret police have held their position throughout the ages. They can make or break a king, or in the case of J. Edgar Hoover, a president. But the role is so full of insecurities and paranoia that the power it provides also cancels itself out. You cannot rest at ease. And what good is power if it brings you no peace? One last warning. Do not imagine that your master's dependence on you will make him love you. In fact, he may resent and fear you. But as Machiavelli said, it is better to be feared than loved. Fear you can control. Love, never. Depending on an emotion are subtle and changeable as love or friendship will only make you insecure. Better to have others depending on you without a fear of the consequence of losing you than out of love for your company. Vines and many thrones. Below the roots grow deep and wide. Above the vines push through bushes entwine themselves, and trees and poles window ledges. To get rid of them would cost such toil and blood, it is easier to let them climb. Make people depend on you. More is to be gained from such dependence than courtesy. He who has slacked his thirst immediately turns his back on the well, no longer needing it. When dependence disappears, so does civility and decency, and then respect. The first lesson with experience should teach you to keep hope alive but never satisfied, keeping even a royal patron in need of you. The weakness of making others depending on you is that you are in some measure dependent on them. But trying to move beyond that point means getting rid of those above you. It means standing alone, depending on no one. Such in a monopolistic drive of J.P. Morgan and John D. Rockefeller. To drive out all competition would be in complete control. If you can corner the markets, so much the better. No such dependence comes without price. You are forced to isolate yourself. Monopolies often turn inwards and destroy themselves from the internal pressure. They also stir up powerful resentment, making their enemies bond together to fight them. The drive for complete control is often rare and often fatal. Better to place yourself in a position of mutual dependence than to follow this critical law rather than look for its reversible. You will not have the unbearable pressure of being on top, and the master above you will insist be your slave, for he will depend on you.